Yeah, thanks a lot for giving us the opportunity to talk about the EHDEN project, which is, for me, a very exciting project. And I've spent the last 2 years more than 40 hours a week on this topic. I can tell you it's been a very exciting 2 years, and we still have 3.5 years to go in the project. So we are almost halfway. So what's EHDEN about? So EHDEN is a project, European project, that aims to build a federated, large-scale federated network of data sources in Europe, standardized to a common data model, and that is, of course, the OMOP common data model. Now, what's important to realize is that the goal of the project is not so much to build a network by itself, but really to execute studies on that network as well and facilitate that. So the second E in the acronym of EHDEN, evidence, is actually extremely important for us. So even though mapping hundreds of databases in Europe is fantastic, I think the project itself is really a success if we've been able to also execute studies on those different data sources and in the end, of course, help patient care. So EHDEN sounds like the paradise of data, and we hope to get there at some point. But we do struggle in Europe with exactly the same problems as everybody else in the world, and that's the challenge of real-world data. In the fact that it's an issue of unstructured or data that's structured differently across multiple databases. But also in Europe, there's an additional challenge that is that we have a lot of vocabularies as well in Europe that needs to be standardized. And of course, in the OMOP common data model, both the structure and the terminologies are standardized, which is a big benefit for us to execute these studies at a large scale across Europe. So the EHDEN project is tackling the data interoperability issue of standardizing the data. We also work on building standardized analytics to really make benefit of or make use of that data. And as I mentioned earlier, we are building a large data network. All of this is important, but what's also extremely important is to build a strong community around that, especially when we think about sustainability of the framework that we are setting up. So we are also investing in that quite a bit in the EHDEN project. In the presentation today, I will talk you through the work that has been done in the last 2 years, at least some highlights of that, because it's definitely too much to talk about in 1 hour. And we have a look forward to what's going to happen this year. As I mentioned, we have, of course, decided already in the beginning of the project, when writing the proposal, that we're going to map to the OMOP common data model because of its adoption in the world and its great benefit of standardizing both the structure and the terminology. That also means that we could step on a running train, the OHDSI train, which has made a lot of progress over the years, and I'm very happy that I was also part of that already outside of EHDEN, and still am heavily involved in the OHDSI work. So the EHDEN project is collaborating heavily with OHDSI because of our common vision and our common goals. The EHDEN project is an IMI project, and this is a very important funding opportunity that we have in Europe, where you can have public-private partnerships between, well, the public consortium, in this case led by Erasmus Medical Center, with me being the coordinator of the project. And that public consortium consists of multiple universities like Oxford University, but also NICE, HTA body in the UK, and several small to medium enterprises like Synapse for the management, but also OHDSI and the Hive, who some of you are familiar with because they are also heavily involved in OHDSI. And next to that, we have non-profit organizations like the European Patient Forum and ICHOM that help us to get to our goals in the project. Beside that, we have the FPA side, the pharmaceutical industry, led by Janssen, and Nigel Hughes will take over at the end of the presentation. We'll talk to you, well, he will talk to you later in that today. And then what's important to realize is that the project is like 5.5 years, so it's a pretty long project. And we are now in our 3rd year. We just ended our 2nd year. And the budget of the total budget of the project is 29 million euro. Now, a large part of that funding is reserved to map data to the OMO Common Data Model. That's about 17 million euro, and I'll come back to that later in my presentation. What's EHDEN about? It's on the first hand, of course, about harmonization of data. And the original call text said that we had to map 100 million anonymized health records to the OMO Common Data Model. I think we are already past that point. Also, I think it's not really the goal here. A better goal would be to have a very nice geographic spread and cover all the different countries in Europe and many different types of databases across Europe. So that's something we like to get to by the end of the project. And next to that, federation. So how do we execute our studies across the databases, and how can we build up an architecture to realize that? And of course, again, that's building on top of what OHDSI has been developing over the years, and we like to further improve that. We're working on community building, interactions with many different stakeholders across Europe, including regulators and European Commission. But also building educational material. So we'll talk a bit later about the EHDEN Academy, which is an online resource for training. And finally, we work on outcomes, so enabling outcomes-driven healthcare. And ICHOM is one of the organizations in our consortium that is driving that piece of the work. Now, as in all these large European projects, a project is divided in multiple work packages. And in this project, we divided it in 3 different topics. One topic is really to drive the development. So that's work package 1, 2, and 3. These are these develop kind of use cases in the project to drive the tool development. So the first one is really about evidence workflow development, all the steps that we need to generate that reliable evidence, outcomes-driven healthcare, with the ICHOM standards, and personalized medicine, which is all about predictive analytics and comparative effectiveness in that domain. Then we need to build stuff in EHDEN, and therefore we have a work package on technical implementation, and I'll show some results of that also later in my presentation. And finally, we need data, and we need to build a community around that, and that's where work package 5 and 6 are all about. In work package 5, we have been building processes to open calls for data partners and SMEs, and have internal and external reviewers that then review those applications. In work package 6, it's all about outreach and sustainability, so how to develop value propositions for all our stakeholders, and how to set up a sustainable operational model for EHDEN post the IMI phase. And of course, there's a project management and dissemination work package. Where are we now after 26 months? So we like to divide the project into 4 different pillars. One is really about the data community. So I'm going to talk a bit about how we have been expanding our data network and our support network. One part is about technical architecture. So what type of tools have we been developing to support the trajectory from source data to reliable evidence? We have a research pillar where we are developing use cases and executing them in the network, and of course use them to develop tools to support these different types of use cases. And then sustainability is the third pillar, which is all about planning for the future, and Nigel will talk a bit about that as well. At the core of the project is the Harmonization Fund, as I mentioned earlier. So that's about 70 million euro fund that is reserved for data partners and to give financial support to them to map their data. So in EHDEN, we have developed 2 different processes. One for data partners to be onboarded, and one for SMEs, that's small to medium enterprises, that can help the data partners to map their data to OMO. So we have multiple calls per year for both tracks. And once the data partners have been selected, they can be matched with the SMEs, and the SMEs will help them to map their data and go through all the normal cycles of ETL with a workshop and all the different steps to get to a high quality CDM. We have had a couple of these calls. For the SMEs, we did 2 calls. And just a little bit of background, the SMEs are asked to follow courses in the EHDEN Academy. And they also originally had to visit Erasmus, is the image that you see on the top with maybe some familiar faces to you, where they had to actually map a database to the OMOP CDM in those 2 days. We had a bit of introduction, still a bit of training, and we handed them the book of OHDSI, as you can see. But then the second day was all about mapping the IPSI database, which is a GP database that we have in our department in Erasmus. Of course, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we couldn't have another face-to-face meeting. So the second one was done online with a huge number of SMEs, again, like 15 more. We went through that process in the Teams environment, which was different, not optimal because you really missed that interaction with the people. But I think it worked out fine. And at the moment, we have now 26 different small to medium enterprises, companies across Europe, as you see on the left on the map, that are able to help data partners mapping their data. A new SME call will open in March. So more information is on our website, and you can watch our social media channels, and I'm sure that OHDSI will share that information as well. What's exciting about this, first of all, the amount of small to medium enterprises that were interested in going to this process. We didn't think that that would be the case when we wrote the project, but there's a huge interest, and we have a lot of SMEs applying for this. And therefore, we decided to build a service provider directory where everybody can see which companies have now been certified, where they are, and how they can be contacted by everyone in the community. So you can go there on the website of EHDEN, and you can click on a specific company, get information on what their services are, and you can hire them for your job. And I think this is a very important part of EHDEN because, especially for sustainability, we will not be able to be mapping databases by ourselves everywhere in Europe. We need to have that support network. And that's, I think, a very good outcome already. And we hope to fill in all the gaps in the map with additional companies in the upcoming calls. What's also very nice to see is that these SMEs are also generating business outside of the EHDEN calls. So we are in contact with them. We have like monthly meetings with the SMEs to see what they are doing. And it's quite interesting to see that they are participating in other projects, also other IMI projects that are mapping data to OMOP, for example, or they have relationships with data partners that they then push to our open calls for data.
And if I may add, it's Nigel. Yep. Peter, it's also fascinatingly a number of our pharma company partners are also interacting with a number of these SMEs as well, which is very good too. And it kind of links in with the European Commission's push actually to create this whole kind of digital marketplace in terms of healthcare, and SMEs figure very highly in that. So we're kind of contributing to a wider strategy as well as also related to OMOP and OHDSI.
Sure. So for the data partners, it's a different story. They can get funding directly from the EHDEN project, and that's divided in 3 different types of activities. Whether they have to start from scratch, so they have no data at all in the CDM, that would result in the highest amount of funding. But also some databases may already be on the CDM and need additional data domains to be added, or even if they are completely done, there's also a service in EHDEN to inspect the data, the ETL, and do some standardized analytics on that to report that back to EHDEN. Dependent on the complexity of the database, which is decided based on, for example, the White Rabbit output that people have to share in their application form, the review committee decides on the complexity, and that has impact on the amount of funding that the databases get. And more details on that you can find on the website. There will be a new data partner call opening in April, so watch our website and social media channels again if you're interested in that. It's open to all EU member states and 8 2020 countries, and you can find a list. I wasn't aware of all these countries myself, but it's a pretty long list actually you can find on our website. Now, after 3 calls, we have now 60 data partners that are in different stages of mapping in the network, and here you see a distribution across the countries. I think still some gaps that, especially in Eastern Europe, we like to fill in more of these countries and hopefully soon have a completely, at least light blue Europe on the map. But I'm already very excited that after these 3 calls, so that's in about a year, a little bit more than a year, we have now these 60 data partners being active. And it's a quite diverse set of data sources as well, from hospital database to some registry data or GP databases, etc. And we like to expand that also in the diversity as well in the upcoming calls. Within those 3 calls, there was one that was a kind of special and not something we planned for, which was related to COVID-19. So we opened a dedicated call to get data sources that have COVID-19 data. And for that, we went to a slightly different approach where we formed a task force within EHDEN with experts, people that have been mapping many databases before, from the small to medium enterprises and our other partners. And we had very intense collaboration, and still have, with these 24, I think it was, data partners that had COVID-19 data. This means that we still have like a lot of Teams environments. So here you see all the logos of all the different databases that we are interacting with at the moment. And with all these databases, we are having almost weekly meetings to follow up on their progress and to help them, and also to do quality control checks with them and go to the full process from workshop, normally like kind of 3-hour blocks, where we start defining the ETL all the way till the end, which is running the data quality dashboard and other tools, and submitting the data to our catalog. This was really exciting period, and especially because we are so close at the teams. In the other normal calls, it's only done by the external SMEs, and we are a bit far away. In this case, we are really interacting with all of them very intensively, and we're also building a very strong relationship with these different databases, which I think is very exciting. It was also very eye-opening to see the diversity in competences, local competences, but also the readiness of the data and the complexity of the data. I mean, we've seen databases with literally hundreds of source tables and other databases that are very well structured and already have a nice map, almost automatic map to the CDM. And this actually demonstrates why there's such a big need for a project like EHDEN and the OHM Common Data Model and OHDSI in the world to help us to pass this point of large interoperability issues. Also, there's a lot of different infrastructure needs in these organizations, and also from that exercise, we learned quite a lot. So talking about infrastructures and tool development, we are building a portal where we host all different types of tools, including the well-known Atlas and Arachne and all the other stuff. But also we bring together things like the information and frequent asked questions section. So there's one portal for the people in the data network to go to and then use all these different tools. We are working on connecting all these tools together is something that's happening this year, where we would have single sign-on across all these different tools. But also quite exciting, and I'm very happy with that, is that we are building a service desk. So kind of self-service portal where people can log in and can create a ticket or a question that will be followed up. So we are really investing this year in improving the user friendliness and the interaction with our users. We're also working on plans to really release all the infrastructure at scale across all these data partners, and maybe also all our stakeholders that will run studies later. So we are investing time in continuous checks on our servers and looking at the speed of the servers across Europe. So we really try to professionalize all those different steps at the moment in the EHDEN project. An important component is the database catalog, where we host information about our databases, which consists of a questionnaire with all kinds of questions, which especially things that we cannot measure on the CDM itself. But we also measure data directly from the CDM, like aggregated information that we want to share. And that's done through an R package that people can run against the database. And it will extract, just like Achilles, aggregated data. And we added a couple of extra queries that we thought would be very useful. What's nice about this tool is that the data partner can then upload that outputs directly in the catalog, and automatically all kind of visualizations are generated. So the data is loaded in the database, and on top of that, there's a tool called Superset that we use to automatically generate all kind of visualizations, demographics about the data domains, the number of visits, but also quite exciting, a concept browser where you can browse all the individual concepts in the database with the descendant record count and the record count. So it's not patients, but it's a number of records, but it gives you a good indication on the availability of the data in that specific database. These things are rounded because of privacy and all kind of stuff, but I think it's an exciting new development. This is for one database, but imagine what you can do when you look across databases. So we've built now new dashboards where we are visualizing the growth of the network. And you see an example here of 5 of the databases where we see the distribution in the countries, the distribution on the different data types across the countries. And then all the information that I showed on the level of the individual database is also available here, but then by comparing them across multiple databases, which is quite exciting. So you can search on country, search on database types, or even data sources, and click multiple data sources and then visualize them together. This also opens up the possibility to then do that concept browsing across databases, so you can see which individual concept name is available in which data sources. And you see here an example of that with the hundreds being shown because we round up everything to the nearest 100 in the database. But this is a nice view, but even a better view is to look at individual codes and then see how many databases in total in the whole network would have that specific code. And I think that will be very helpful when we start building cohorts that should fire across multiple databases in the data network. With respect to ETL tooling, a lot of work has been done. There's no time to go in detail there, but I'm very happy that the Hive, one of our partners, is maintaining some of actually almost all of the ETL tools now, all the rabbits, and extending them. We've been working on the tool to support drug mappings at Erasmus. And finally, I think a good, interesting thing to mention is that we are exploring the use of Usagi, but now in a collaborative framework. So we can distribute the mapping across a team of people, because we really see the need of a large amount of work on vocabulary mapping that could not be managed by one individual organization. So we are exploring the use of Usagi in kind of version control together with Git and GitHub system. And we are trying this out now, and we'll report back to OHDSI to tell you all about our conclusions on that process. The other important thing in the ETL section I want to mention is a tool, the CDM Inspection Package that we have developed, which allows you to do additional checks on top of your CDM. So it's part of our procedure when a data partner has to submit his final milestone. They have to submit an inspection report. And in that report, we test things, for example, like, are all the vocabularies loaded? How many unmet codes are there? What's the level of mapping in the drug domain? So to clinical drug level or ingredient level. But we also do infrastructure checks, so the speed of all the queries. We get some system information on what type of database management system they're using, but also how many cores and how many memory. So we get a very nice overview of the infrastructure across the native data network. The tool then shares not only or automatically generates a Word document in the EHDEN template, but also generates an R object that we can collect from all the different data sources, and that allows us to get insight in the infrastructure as a whole and the performance of the databases. The research pillar, just 2 slides on that, because I think there will be other or other moments that we can talk about that in more depth. We are doing research in all three pillars that OHDSI is working on: clinical characterization, patient level prediction, and population level effect estimation. We do that through multiple study-a-thons that have been presented before at OHDSI, but we also have use cases dedicated to specific topics. For example, drug utilization and risk minimization and effectiveness of that is a topic that we are currently working on together with the European Medicines Agency, trying to figure out what would be the ideal type of analytical tools that we can run on top of the CDM to generate all the output and tables and figures that we need to answer that specific question. The same we do for regulatory and safety questions, and HTA is another, health technology assessment is another topic where use cases are being developed. And these use cases will be extended over time based on either other IMI projects or internal focus. An important component is methods development. So there's a lot of work being done there in the space of prediction and effect estimation, but focuses are on heterogeneity of treatment effect and building an R package for that, natural language processing some people are working on, disease trajectories, frequent pattern mining, really using the order of the diseases in prediction, and learning curve research to answer the question, how much data do we actually need to do patient level prediction? And all of this is ongoing or have already resulted in different publications. Other interesting topics that we can talk about maybe at some time in the patient level prediction and population level effect estimation working group is a review that we've executed on patient level prediction models, and we are evaluating that and creating a nice publication on that. And explainable AI is another topic, a research topic that we are trying to tackle in EHDEN. There's a lot of work done, and I would like to refer to our Zenodo environment where we collect all our public deliverables and also all the publications and preprints that EHDEN has been working on. A lot of that is also, of course, in collaboration with OHDSI. So I can invite you to go there and have a look at. I think there's more than 40 items or so in that environment at the moment. With that, I want to turn it over to you, Nigel, to talk a bit about community building and sustainability.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thanks for the great overview, and I hope everyone will agree, an awful lot of activity in the first couple of years. So as we probably all appreciate, particularly here within OHDSI, but certainly now within EHDEN, it's very much about the community and the collaborations and working and engaging within an open science ethos. And much of the work we're talking about here with EHDEN is obviously related to data and methods and research, but actually also is about engagement of various partners within this whole community. So we're actively engaged in a number of different levels here, whether it's communications work or active engagement with different key bodies within Europe, stemming from some of the activity within the project, for instance, with health technology assessment bodies, driven very much by our NICE colleagues, but also others within Work Package 2, to particularly look at the application of the OMOP CDM in relation to HTA studies, and particular nuances to the methodologies required in conducting studies, which is different really in terms of working with regulators. And actually, we published a paper in Pharmacoeconomics in December. You'll notice that also on Zenodo, on the use of the OMOP CDM in relation to HTA research, but also right through to communications on a number of webinars that we've conducted over the last couple of years, and will continue to do so through this year. For example, also planning later this year to focus on Central Eastern and Southeastern Europe, where, as we already saw, there are traditional gaps in terms of working with data partners. We're very actively engaged, and we kind of work with European Medicines Agency as kind of a special partner. They're not part of the 22 within the consortium, but we kind of treat them in some respects in that way. And we have a very nice working relationship with our colleagues there, monthly meetings and so forth. But also bearing in mind that EMA has its own views and work going forward on network development, regulatory science and methodological aspects, and using real world data. And we hope, I don't want to count chickens too much at the moment, but certainly a keenness to consider incorporating OMOP CDM and the OHDSI framework within that aspect as well too. And then above and overarching that, as we're an IMI project, we're funded actually by the European Commission as well as by FBO, the industry. The European Commission is working on an overarching network, a European health data space going forward for digitalization of healthcare. A number of different data spaces in things like automobile industry, telecommunications, but also a pilot one in health. And this is also viewed as a kind of federated architecture across member states, inclusive of clinical care, so-called primary use, as well as secondary or research use. And we're collaborating clearly in where EHDEN fits alongside with the regulatory pathway, but also with the European Commission's plans going forward over the next number of years. And also, clearly, all of this is incorporating an educational requirement, of course, as well. We work with many different individuals at all different levels of knowledge and expertise and skills. So that's always a need to educate, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Peter, if you mind jumping to the next slide. So the Academy, you've heard, hopefully quite a number of you on this call have heard of the Academy now. It's had been a number of mentions, including in the community calls last week, starter call for new OHDSI members. There's actually, thank you, Craig, on the navigation banner on the OHDSI homepage, a link through to the Academy, but also a link through to a video from Henrik Johns, who's part of Peter's group in EMC, where this was taken from the OHDSI Symposium in October last year, which is a very nice overview of the Academy as well. You recall probably from Peter's mention earlier that we're working with SMEs, we're training and certifying them on a kind of ETL learning pathway, ETL curriculum for consistent methodology in working with the OMOP CDM, an OHDSI framework. And this is really where the Academy stems from. We operated that in the first year with the SMEs, and then April of last year, can't believe it's almost a year now, and what a year, we launched the Academy. And this is open educational resources based on the open source Moodle platform, and very much developed by, again, our Erasmus colleagues in Peter's group, Henrik and others as well, but now expanding. It's free, it's available to anyone internationally. It's not at the moment an educational entity, i.e. we don't give qualifications out, although you get badges and all those things for concluding your modules. But we are now expanding beyond the ETL pathway, a learning pathway, to other areas like tools and methods and skills and so forth, again within the OHDSI framework. If we move to the next slide, Peter, thank you. Conscious of time, so I'll motor on a bit quicker. So it's free education in observational research from the perspective of OHDSI, and clearly, you know, in growing not beyond EHDEN, but also within the OHDSI community. So certainly not just content from us within EHDEN, but also from OHDSI colleagues, and more importantly, going forward in the future, I think, and in engagement with the OHDSI community to develop even more content. It's very modular based, so all courses are modular in nature, and you can take them quite easily, I think, over a period of time. We don't set time limits, of course, but you can take them in kind of bite-sized chunks, if you like, very media and video based, but also with text, knowledge checkers, and so forth. And certainly already mentioned around the ETL pathway and the more global community. I think in the future, we certainly see this as a growing potential and forum for the community related to the educational aspects of OHDSI, and also potential partners. Oops, can we go back? Sorry, there's potential partners and sponsors within the Academy and its development, I think, going forward in the community. And there are other initiatives in the real world space that we could probably link with as well. But more importantly, I think it's part of this overall push to enhance the adoption of certain standards, in this case from OHDSI, more widely in terms of those working with real world data and generating evidence. But with great, I think, also opportunities for insight into what's going on in relation to education and practice going forward in the future. We will be conducting a survey of participants in the coming weeks, actually, after the first year. And I think that will be quite insightful, as it were, in terms of people's opinion of the Academy, but also other areas of their own work. And maybe certainly further down the road in terms of sustainability of both EHDEN and EHDEN Academy, you know, potentially more of a formalization of the Academy's role and remit and so on. And clearly the links with other areas of work and interest. And I see you on the screen there, George, but for instance, the work you're going with the FDA and so on in the biologic space, you know, there are many areas that we could explore here. Let's move to the next slide. Thanks, Peter. So actually now we're approaching almost about 840 plus participants who have enrolled since April and have an account on the Academy. Probably about 50% are active in the last 14 days. You can see the geographical map which in some respects maybe reflects also the placement of the OHDSI community, but you certainly see a lot of participants in US, UK and Spain, but growing in other parts of the world as well. And this is partly driven also by our SMEs, as we mentioned, and as that's grown to those 26 in 14 countries, but also much wider now in terms of researchers and so on. One of the things we're looking to do over time is develop different learning pathways. So maybe, well, not maybe, but actually driven by potentially functional areas. So for instance, maybe there could be a learning pathway in regulatory science or HTA related aspects of using real world data. There may be commonalities in modules. You'd all start with, for instance, understanding the CDM and vocabularies and so on, and some of the tools, Atlas and various other things as well. But there may then be specific modules related to certain content specialism. And this is an area we're exploring currently. Certainly expanding the content development, partly also from EHDEN, so to support some of the platform development that Peter was giving an overview earlier. But to enable people to use the EHDEN platform in the future, there'll need to be educational resources, and we'll embed them in the academy. Everything from kind of tools, vignettes to larger kind of storyboarded overviews of how to conduct research via the EHDEN portal and so on. We're also working with the European Patients Forum right now on creating a more lay public patient group course around real world data, real world evidence, which is therefore less technical, and that will be accompanied by podcasts and other activity as course as well. And also looking to expand on courses that Patrick's group has been developing from within Janssen last year and through this year. And maybe potentially it's something to be discussed. It's noteworthy. There's no education, I think, working group within OHDSI, and it may be something that people might be interested in terms of a number of key initiatives already, I think, within the community that we can interrelate with from the academy and beyond too. Lastly, in this last couple of slides, before we finish and leave maybe hopefully a few minutes for conversation, always a rush. This rather strange schematic that you'll see here. So we are at the moment socializing this concept within the 22 partner consortium with key external stakeholders. But actually, one of the key aspects of all of this is sustainability. If we finish as an IMI project, IMI funded and so forth in April 2024, as Peter mentioned earlier, that would be pretty calamitous. So what we're actually talking about here is not starting a project in 2018 as we did, and where will we land in 24, but we're actually building a runway to allow us to take off in 2024 and continue flying. And how we're doing this is creating a concept called the EHDEN Institute, which is a legal entity which we want to initiate this year in parallel with the project. It's somewhat unusual. Most people wait towards the end or if not after the projects, and sometimes that's a bit too late. But actually create something that can work in parallel, can conduct work and interact with within this domain on aspects the project cannot do because the project isn't a legal entity. But also start to build the functions, capabilities and infrastructure in parallel to the project. So there's kind of a seamless transition when the IMI phase of EHDEN is ended in April 2024. And so many of the founding partners would be able to continue. We don't have much time to go through this, well, no time really to go through this today, but we are socializing this concept currently, but effectively, and these are only temporary names at the moment, but within the EHDEN ethos, we're talking about a kind of two divisions, one called Eve and one called Adam. And Eve is very much encapsulating all the work we're currently doing in the project and going forward from there. So all the kind of technical aspects that Peter was mentioning earlier, but the community and tools and platform development and certifications with SMEs and the academy and many other aspects too. And then Adam being all kind of front-facing, conducting studies, supporting research programs, say mini EHDENs in different domains, whether it's therapeutic areas or public health and so on. But really a unique opportunity within Europe, because this doesn't exist at the moment, to create an independent formalization of something like EHDEN with a federated network, highly interchangeable, of course, with what's going on in the global OHDSI community. So just whetting your appetite. We don't have time to go through that in more depth today, but certainly I think there'll be a lot of discussion going forward over the coming weeks and months within OHDSI related to this and many other initiatives which I know have been discussed on the forums and so forth as well. So if we move to, I think it's the final slide, Peter. No, sorry, penultimate slide. What are we focusing on in this year? 3 of 5.5 years. Well, launch of the EHDEN portal, particularly initial stages, and then the metadata-driven catalogue of the data partners, which is already starting to be populated already, and things like the data quality dashboards and various other tools that Peter represented earlier will be following that. But that will be the main kind of interaction and ability to work with the federated data network through the portal. So initiating this year is a big milestone. Certainly many of the data partners, of which 16, of which 25 are COVID-19 from last year's call, will be finalizing their initial mapping cycle. So we want to then start to incorporate them in actually conducting, as was mentioned earlier again, the research use cases. And this is real proof of principle. We know we can conduct at scale federated studies, network studies within OHDSI, but we need to prove we can do it within EHDEN. So clearly this will be a seminal aspect of our work through this year and beyond in terms of being able to illustrate that with evidence generation, as in the name, and in terms of EHDEN. Also, I think in terms of supporting OHDSI and community education, there's still a lot of work to be done, certainly in the European realm, of standard adoption. And we're hoping colleagues like European Medicines Agency and others will utilize the OMOP CDM and OHDSI framework, but many others, including in industry, but also in academia and elsewhere, are really not that well placed or not that knowledgeable of this whole environment for research. And so we've got a lot of work, I think, still to do there, and then that's also inclusive of the academy. And of course, lastly, as already mentioned, the EHDEN Institute Sustainability in terms of the new legal entities parallel to the EHDEN project, but also can we enshrine the kind of the research operating model and future business models within the work that we're doing. And as Peter added to this slide, much more, need much more than that, but these are key priorities. And lastly, the final slide. Thank you, Peter. So, we're all cognizant of the pandemic. We're still in it. It hasn't gone away, unfortunately. We're all looking forward to when it does, and time's still on that. But this has been incredibly impactful for all of us and inclusive of the project. And in some respects has been an accelerator for certain trends. That's actually been a positive. OHDSI is evolving, expanding in Europe, not partly, obviously, we take credit for that within EHDEN, but also organically, particularly in other IMI projects. And we think around 23 projects that we're now aware of recently that are working with the OHDSI framework and the OMOP CDM, which is really quite considerable. And also a number of countries, Denmark, Germany, many others have IMI projects or other related projects of their own locally working within this framework. We clearly are a very unstable realm politically at the moment and economically, and lots of social aspects related to negatively, but also we've seen a clear expansion socio-culturally and technically of networks in response to COVID-19, and this will only increase, and we will see this clearly. OHDSI is a good example of this, of course, pre and certainly during and post the pandemic. So we certainly want to see EHDEN as a kind of thought leader going forward in this very dynamic environment. We're very much working with key bodies enshrined within the infrastructure from European Medicines Agency and Commission in Europe. And we believe we're on track to support observational research in the future. But, and as Patrick continues to remind me, we need to show that's something we can do today. It's not something that's coming tomorrow. And so obviously generating evidence from all of this work, and that's rapid but has high confidence is a clear goal for us within the project overall. Otherwise, all of the rest that we're doing is moot. And I'll stop there. But thank you very much on behalf of Peter and I for giving us the opportunity for exploring this project and the implications of EHDEN. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Peter and Nigel. That was a lot of great information. I will post these recordings on the OHDSI Community Calls page and also on Teams, and also your slides. If you want to send them to me, I'll get them up. A couple minutes. I don't know if anybody has a question they want to ask. Probably only have time for one. If not, Peter and Nigel, if somebody does have a question afterwards, what's the best place to reach out? Best way to reach out?
Either of us, I suppose, or
yeah, or the forum. I think there's a contact form on the website, so you can ask a question there, and we can follow up on that.
And you can also email inquiries@ehden.eu as well, and that will also get to us. Yeah.
Do you want to post that? Do you want to post that email right in the chat? Of course, the form is typically the right answer, but if you want to throw that email in the chat, because somebody's probably going to watch the video afterwards or think of a question and want to send it.
Sure.
No, that's fine. I'll put that in now.
Okay, if there are no other questions, again, thank you to Peter and Nige for this great information. A reminder, next week we will talk about COVID research within the OHDSI community, so really looking forward to that. These postings will be up on OHDSI later today. Thanks again to everybody for joining, and have a great week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Nige. Great job.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.